Capital gains tax release is tricky, but highly examinable. And so in this video, I will show you how to apply incorporation relief using some short numerical examples. Incorporation relief is when we have an unincorporated business, so a sole trader or a partnership business, that's effectively being sold to a company. So if I run a sole trade business and decided I'd prefer it to be run as a company, I would set up the new company, Edgar Limited, and then sell all of the assets of my sole trade business to Edgar Limited in return for shares in the new company. I might also get some cash as part of the sale, but we'll look at how to deal with that later on. For now, let's imagine the assets of my sole trade business are worth £600,000. So when I sell them to Edgar Limited, I get shares in return, and the value of those shares will be the same as the value of the assets I've given up, so £600,000. Now what I've done is sell some assets, and therefore there should be some capital gains tax I should be paying on the gain I've made on the sale of those assets. But we've got a special capital gains tax relief that can apply in situations where we have a sole trade or partnership business that's incorporating into a company, and it's called incorporation relief. And what it allows me to do is defer the gains that I've made on the sale of the assets of my business until some point in the future when I sell the shares that I received in that new company, Edgar Limited. So let's say that my £600,000 assets from my sole trade business are made up of 300,000 of goodwill, 200,000 for premises and 100,000 for inventory. And so the gains on those, say they were 300,000 on the goodwill, 100,000 on the premises, and there would be no chargeable gain on the inventory because it's a current asset and therefore it's an exempt asset for capital gains tax. Now, incorporation relief would allow me to defer the gain on the goodwill and the premises, so that £400,000, to some point in the future when I sell the shares that I received in Edgar Limited on incorporation. And that means I've got no gains chargeable to any tax at the time when I've sold my business to the company. Now, some point down the line when I sell the shares, what I'll do at that point is instead of using the actual cost of the shares, I'll use what we call the reduced base cost, which will be the cost of the shares less the incorporation relief amount. So how much did the shares cost me? Well, they cost me £600,000 because I swapped the assets of my business, which were worth £600,000 at the time, for those shares. But in my gains computation, when I sell the shares, I'm not going to use 600,000 as the cost. Instead, what I'm going to do is use a reduced base cost figure, which is found by taking that 600,000 real cost and deducting from that the incorporation relief of £400,000. So I'm going to use 200,000 as my cost to set against the proceeds that I get for selling my shares in the future. Now, the consequences of doing that then are that when I sell the shares, not only am I going to be charged tax on the gain that I make on the shares themselves if they've risen in value, but I'm also getting taxed on the gain that I deferred from selling my premises and the goodwill when the business was incorporated. Now, the picture looks a bit different when we get some cash as well as shares when we sell our business to the company. And the reason for that is the general rule that HMRC follows with reliefs, which is that if you receive some cash now, you can afford to pay some tax now. And therefore, you won't be allowed to defer the whole amount of a gain to some point in the future, and you're going to have to pay some tax now at the time of the disposal. So let's say I've still got my sole trade business with assets worth £600,000, which I sell to Edgar Limited, but this time, in return, what I get is £500,000 worth of shares and £100,000 of cash. HMRC is going to take the view that I'm not allowed to defer the whole amount of my gains of £400,000 because I received £100,000 of cash, so I can afford to pay some tax now. But we need to work out how much is going to be taxable now of our gain of 400,000 and how much can I defer until some point in the future when I sell the shares that I'm getting in Edgar Limited. And to do that, we use a formula. Now, I'm afraid you are going to have to memorise this. You're not going to see this on your tax tables in the exam. So we take the total gains amount, which in our case is 400,000, and we multiply that by the market value of the shares that we got when we incorporated the business, so that was 500,000. And we divide that by the total market value of our assets at the time of incorporation, which was the £600,000. Now, this gives us an amount of £333,000. So that tells us that we're allowed to defer 333,000 of the gain using incorporation relief, and the remaining 67,000 of the gain is going to be chargeable to capital gains tax now at the time of incorporation. Now, it might be that we can apply business asset disposal relief to the amount that's chargeable now, although it's unlikely for the goodwill, as in many cases when we incorporate the business, we end up with a close company situation and there are restrictions on BADR being applicable there. Now, the 333,000 that I've deferred, that's going to reduce the cost of the shares from 500,000 down to 167,000. And so that's the cost figure that I'm going to use against the proceeds figure that I get when I sell my shares in the future. So say I get £670,000 in the future when I sold my shares. I would deduct from that 167,000 to get a gain of 503,000. That's going to be a bigger gain because we've got the deferral of the gain from my assets from that whole sole trade business that I incorporated, and they've been rolled into the gain on the shares that I'm now selling. Again, we could have business asset disposal relief applying to the sale of the shares in this situation. If you found this helpful, please do check out some of my other tax videos here and make sure you hit subscribe and get a notification when I release a new video on the channel.